Hey everybody, welcome to the Michael West live stream. I'm your host Steph, and today we're going to be talking about some more issues to do with the federal election coming up, which of course is going to be less than a week away on May the 3rd this weekend. Last episode we got into some of the issues at the top of what voters are thinking about. We were talking about the housing crisis, we were talking about the cost of living, that sort of thing, and as I said earlier, this week we're going to be talking a little bit more about defence and energy and what the mainstream media isn't telling you. We have some great guests tonight, but firstly, we're going to start out and introduce the great Michael West himself. Michael, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Steph. How are you?
Yep, going very well, thank you. We've got two experts on with us today. The first one is John Cadogan. He is an automotive industry analyst and creator of AutoExpert on YouTube. With a background in engineering, he tackles industry myths, greenwashing, and corporate spin with sharp wit and hard data. Hello, John. Good to have you with us. I assume he wishes me well as well. And then thirdly, we have Carrick Ryan, of course, former AFP officer and political commentator and national security commentator as well. Carrick brings his experience to his analysis of national security, international relations, and Australia's security challenges. How are you, Carrick?
Not bad, Steph. Can you hear me?
I can. And
that's a good start.
John?
All right.
Can we hear you, John?
I can hear you loud and clear. I did actually say thanks very much for having me on the show, for the record.
Oh, I didn't catch that. It might have just been me. Apologies for that. Hello.
I'm glad John has dialed in because I know nothing about cars, so it would have been a really difficult subject to cover.
It's going to be great.
I always feel like that before. I always feel exactly like that before I go on any show. I always feel like I know nothing about what I'm going to talk about. Go figure.
We're all in a bit of the same boat there. I just know about cars what my dad tells me, but it kind of goes in one ear and out the other a little bit. Not the top of my priority list, but we're going to learn today. First of all, Michael, what's been going on in the news? What's the big story? What have you been working on?
We've got a dark money thing coming out, Steph, on AstroTurfers tomorrow morning. We've done a piece on the economy today. And, you know, the track record of Labor and Coalition, etc. But it's all about campaign shenanigans at the moment, just a few days to go. And you know, everyone's throwing the kitchen sink at it. But look, it's terrific to have John and Carrick on because they're two issues. You know, we do a bit with Rex Patrick on, obviously, AUKUS and defence and those kind of things. So it's an immensely important subject for Australia because, of course, you know, are we going to be sending troops off to another American war? The world is changing so quickly geopolitically. And, of course, John, with EVs and car land and everything like that, there's plenty of moving and shaking going on there too. So I know nothing about cars either. I can change a tyre, but that's about it. So it'll be great to get John's wisdom on that because it's just an enormous sector.
It is an enormous sector. That's true. And it affects so much, you know, tariffs. Obviously, there were heaps of tariff talk going on in the US, but I do believe that Australia has tariffs on some Chinese, you know, goods, including cars. Is that right, John?
My understanding is that we have a free trade agreement with China. We also have them, obviously, with places like Thailand and Japan, where we source most of our cars. And that's kind of interesting because import duty is only payable on cars from places like Europe, as I understand it. So most of our major automotive trading partners are not subjected to tariffs at all.
Ah, okay. I must have got mixed up then. There was a 10% figure, then there was 150%, all of that back and forth. And you're right, Michael. Mostly the media's been focusing on campaign shenanigans, and they were focusing on that quite a lot last week as well. But there's not much else that's cutting through, really, unfortunately, because as you said, they are very important topics. John, you recently visited some factories. You went to China and had a look at what their manufacturing is like, and sort of dispelled some of the myths around the Made in China label. Yeah. You tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I went to China for a week in January, and basically that was to look at renewable manufacturing. So I looked at 2 battery manufacturers, Alpha ESS for energy storage systems, Sungrow, which is one of the world's largest manufacturers of batteries and inverters for solar systems and things like that, and also Ryzen, which makes solar panels. And I have to say, the whole experience, right from all the travel we did ex-Shanghai, was on 250 and 300 kilometre an hour, very fast trains, for example. And I was sitting in them, as you do, looking out the window, wondering which one was really the advanced country, Australia or China. And then inside the factories, we're talking about absolute cutting edge technology, robots moving little silicon wafers like this that are only 100 microns thick from different doping station to doping station. And it all happens really fast, and it's extremely high tech. And the really worrying thing, I think, for Australian manufacturing is that there's been a point of inflection pretty clearly with China. And what they've got now is they've got so many highly educated PhDs that are specialists in their subject, whether it's making solar or making cars, that they can do their own R&D now. They no longer have to beg, borrow, or steal technology from the West. Like, you go to these places, if you swing a cat, the next thing you'll see is 20 PhDs unconscious on the floor, kind of thing. And that means that their dependency on the West for the technology to go out and manufacture is much less than it used to be, and will probably shortly be non-existent. And that's a pretty chilling thought, really. We're going to be relegated to the position of being a customer, although happily in Australia's case, a customer with endless liquefied natural gas and coal to sell them, which iron ore and things of that nature. We also do a lot of gold trading. We send a lot of gold to China for use in various tech sort of applications. So that's good for us. They need our resources and our food, but they also need us to buy their stuff. And we are increasingly dependent on them to buy just about everything that you take for granted.
Yeah. The stereotype for made in China really has dropped away. I've noticed that with things that I get from China, whether I'm buying them directly or I notice the label on it after I've bought it. It's just been exponential. It's absolutely crazy. And since they're sort of the leaders now in the sort of EV making space, pretty much, I mean, you've obviously got Elon Musk with Tesla in the United States. You've got the trade war going on with China. Maybe, Michael, you can know a little bit more about that. Dutton has this fuel policy out, right? It's one of the main, I think it is one of the main stakes besides nuclear that the Liberals have to sell to us this election. And it's a subsidy, I'm pretty sure. Michael might be able to chime in on that with a little bit more information. But since they're subsidising, vehicles that are dependent on fuel, then that sort of like doesn't do anything for people who already own electric cars or, as the market changes, might own one in the near future. So are these policies from Dutton only going to benefit cars that are dependent on traditional fuel? And sorry, not Carrick. John, you probably have a couple of thoughts about whether it's even possible anyway to have, industrial fleets in Australia of cars that are run by electricity. So
look, this whole issue is extremely difficult to grapple with. It's like wrestling with an octopus, okay? But you can go You can go to the Clean Energy Regulator's website. This might be a little assignment for Josh in the wings here. There's a page called Electricity Sector Emissions and Generation Data 2022-2023. And right down the bottom of that, there's a table that shows the amount of electricity we generate and the CO2 equivalent emissions that go with that. And if you divide one by the other and you get the mathematics right, you get 647 grams per kilowatt hour of CO2. And then if you say to yourself, well, what does that mean for an EV? And you crunch the numbers on that, currently it means that if you drive a pretty standard sort of EV, like a Tesla Model 3 or something, then the CO2 emissions from the electricity from the grid that you use to charge your car, that's going to be roughly equivalent to a Toyota Corolla, not the hybrid one, just a straight combustion
Regular
engine
Corolla.
one, or a Hyundai i30 or Kia Sorento, something like that.
Yeah,
so the green characteristics of EVs absolutely depend on how you create the electricity. So unless we spectacularly reform the grid in Australia, it's a little bit of greenwashing, suggesting that you're absolutely doing some good if you drive an EV, because obviously you're not committing tailpipe pollution to our built-up areas, which is a major problem. So that's good. And you're probably doing a little bit for energy security for the nation. But as to zero emissions, like, that is pretty much a scam.
Yeah, wow. I'm not an expert. That sounds like it adds up, like, to the layman that I am. But isn't it sort of, we've been propping up the fossil fuel industry for a while, I think, and I'm not sure. Did Gina Reinhart and Fortescue and the gas companies as well, do they get a huge benefit from continuing to have Corollas on the road as opposed to more EVs if they cost the same, that maybe they don't deserve? Michael?
Well, they'll just prolong fossil fuels for as long as possible. I mean, it's as simple as that. That's the whole politics of it at the moment. But and John's point is a really interesting one, because if you're turning over your EV, the costs of making the EV involve a lot of electricity and pollution, and so they sort of cancel each other out a bit, the point of it. But I guess you've got to make longer lasting EVs to make it work, and as you say, John, have a grid. Well, we're up to 50% sometimes on the eastern seaboard of renewables in the grid, so it is heading in the right direction. But John, I was just interested in you had a few years ago when we actually not when we last spoke, but when we were on air together, you were very critical of Tesla, and Elon Musk said it wouldn't happen. I think Electric Jesus was your nickname for him. Well, your prophecy, mate, is looking very omniscient.
Yeah, but this is like, you can't predict the future, right? Like, currently we live on planet satire, because nobody could have foreseen the amazing turnaround in Elon Musk. In fact, there are bumper stickers you can buy now for your Tesla that say, "Don't worry, I bought this before Elon went nuts." And I've even seen a bumper sticker on a BYD, like a Chinese electric car, that says essentially the same thing. "Don't worry, I bought this after Elon went nuts." Because people are just running away from their Teslas, and the profound reduction in sales since this whole philosophical turnaround of Elon Musk is just incredible. There's 74% reduction in sales of Teslas in Australia, and this is after a campaign last year of immense discounting and all kinds of shenanigans in the background to try and prop up sales. So, the change in sentiment is really interesting to me, because Tesla's one of the few brands where the CEO is so inextricably linked to the product and people's enthusiasm for it. Like, most people wouldn't have a clue who the CEO of Woodside or BHP is, but we use their products all day long as well.
And BYD. So what's the production outlook then? Tesla, as you say, it's been an epic fall off in sales, and you'd have to wonder whether it's going to survive now. And of course, it's the Chinese stuff too with Trump's tariff and so on aren't going to help him at all. Although he's always got plenty of largesse from the American government, so he won't be doging himself, I'd imagine. But what is the production outlook now for the Chinese EVs v other parts of the world, Europe and Tesla?
Well, I think Europe is making noises not unlike Trump's noises about trying to put some sort of protection barriers in against the proliferation of EVs. But that's really just because Europe's an auto manufacturing superpower and they're trying to protect their own industries, I think, whereas Trump's doing it under the guise of sort of national security and all kinds of things like that. The problem that we've got in Australia, I guess, is that we've got the most competitive car market on earth. If you look at the number of brands and the sales volume of about 1.1 million units, there's very few sales per brand on average. And we're about to add something like another 12 Chinese manufacturers to that mix. We've already seen the Chinese manufacturers MG and GWM, which used to be called Great Wall Motors. They've already adopted places in the top 10 by sales in Australia. So they've upended Volkswagen and Subaru and brands like that. And from month to month, they push them out of the top 10. So it's going to be really interesting to see what sort of plan the Japanese and South Koreans have to deal with this proliferation of Chinese brands in Australia. And given what's happened so far, I really don't see them pulling a rabbit out of their hat here and making major roadblocks happen.
What are the politics of the Coalition V? Because there's been a few changes, a few backflips in EV policy territory. What do you make of the politics of the EVs, Labor versus Liberal?
The main thing that Dutton is going to do is he's going to continue, apparently, at this stage with the new vehicle efficiency standard, which is basically a penalty system on car makers that fail to meet CO2 overall fleet-wide emissions targets for the different fleets of cars that they sell. So there were going to be relatively heavy financial penalties for that. But if the coalition gets in, they're still going to have the scheme, but there's going to be no penalties. And to me, that's a little bit like still saying it's wrong to commit murder, but not putting anyone inside if they do. Like if there are no consequences to breaking the rules, then why have them?
It's a rich field in white collar crime. I think there's not many big companies with that much leverage, too big to fail, that are being penalised on any front. I think. I just want to.
Well, yeah, like here's your penalty, but forget it.
There definitely must be some national security implications that come through. Which country are we going to have cars supplied from? I know that there's been a little bit of chat in the media in recent years about Chinese cars. Maybe, the GPS is spying on you and sending it all back to China and all that kind of thing. And obviously Tesla is an American company, with Elon Musk being an electric vehicle producer as well. So which way are we going to go?
They're both equally untrustworthy at the moment, aren't they? I think John kind of touched upon the national security aspect just earlier. Putting aside, I guess, the environmental concerns for a moment, in Australia, about 95% of our refined oil is imported. So that's usually coming from Singapore or South Korea. So at any one point, our reliance on oil and our supply of oil could be cut off, especially, it's not implausible that there could be conflict in the region, the Asia-Pacific region, whether that's targeted towards us or not. So at that point, most experts agree that we probably have about 2 weeks worth of oil in Australia to survive off. So if you think about just how many of our industries, our agriculture industries, just being able to bring our food to our groceries, how quickly that would shut down. So notwithstanding the idea that there's definitely some fleets that would just be impossible or implausible with the current technology to completely electrify, it's definitely something we should be working towards, because the less oil that we're using in totality just means that we'd be able to extend that out that bit further if anything untoward was to happen in our region.
Indeed. We've got plenty of gas, though. I remember back in the day, Australia used to be a net exporter. When the Bass Strait was running hot in the 1970s, we were an exporter of oil. So how quickly it turns and how slowly policymakers tend to get their vision in place for the next cycle and so on. I guess on that, John, are you worried at all about the national security implications of Chinese being able to spy on you through their car software? And just quickly, I just noticed they launched the other day, the Chinese, their first fleet of autonomous flying taxis. So, I mean,
what could possibly go wrong, right? What could possibly go wrong with an autonomous flying taxi? That would want to be the most fail-safe technology on Earth, would it not?
Do you really mean flying car taxis?
Yep. They have
I'm not Google that one. I don't believe you.
I'm not particularly concerned about a Chinese vehicle's GPS spying on me because there's already plenty of Chinese tech floating around. In fact, when Ford launched the new Ranger, which was only a couple of years ago now, 18 months, whatever it was, that was supply constrained. They couldn't do it, and it kept getting pushed back because there were 393 parts that are unique to that vehicle that come from China. So we've got an American brand making a ute in China for Australia, and 393 critical parts come from China, and the vehicle can't be built without it. So there's plenty of Chinese tech in all automobiles, I would suggest. The really interesting thing that Carrick brought up, and you brought up, Michael, about fuel security, is that people in Australia have no idea about the absolute volume the sheer volume of liquid hydrocarbons that we depend upon. And the numbers are 20 billion litres per year of petrol and 10 billion litres per year of diesel. And this means advanced medical care, all the stuff at Woolies and Coles, it just stops happening if you don't have liquid hydrocarbons. If you want to put 20 billion litres of petrol in a tank, it's a football field long, like 100 metres, and a football field wide, like 100 metres, and 2 kilometres high. Okay, that would be the biggest man-made structure on Earth if you put it all in one place in a box that shape. So the volume of fuel that we depend upon from Singapore and South Korea is mind-bending, and any interruption to that supply is an absolute catastrophe. And that catastrophe would take place first in our cities because that's where we're the most dependent on things like the supply of bulk food to feed the population. It's a really serious issue that hardly any politician ever talks about.
There's probably another national security aspect, and again, we've kind of touched upon it. I think Chinese manufacturing, the scale of Chinese manufacturing, has generally overall been a good thing for humanity. We're all of a sudden able to get our hands on a lot of consumer goods in a cheaper manner than we've ever been able to in the past. But I think what we see, and Australia experienced this only 5 years ago, that any over-reliance on a single trading partner leaves us vulnerable. China at the time, people often can mistake it, and they tend to view it within the prism of Scott Morrison, who was a deeply unpopular prime minister, and it gets a sort of sense of, well, any enemy of Scott Morrison is kind of a good guy. But we need to remember that it wasn't just his comments that triggered their trade war against us. There were 14 grievances that they listed, and there were things like even that they weren't happy with how the Australian media represented them. They didn't want us to prevent visas being issued to CCP representatives. There was a raft of things which really challenged our sovereignty, and Australia had to stand firm on it, even if Scott Morrison was carrying on like a bit of a galah. So we need to keep that in mind, that just as much as the USA has become a bully and it hasn't been afraid to use trade to try and crush smaller countries, so too has China. And whilst they've backed down, there's every chance that they would decide to do that again. So we need to diversify. I think Chinese manufacturing is great for us, but we've got to be very careful not to be reliant on anyone and to the point where they can crush us with some simple tariffs or trade blocks.
Well,
it is really easy to forget.
The tariffs have backfired badly. And it looks as though Trump's gone into the tariffs with some undercooked economic advisors who don't know what they're doing. And
really? Has he?
As per your comment, John, about all these unique Chinese parts in cars, you can imagine how that goes across the entire, sector of manufacturing, and for them just to slap these tariffs on. I mean, it's certainly a belligerent thing to do, and that brings us, I guess, Carrick, to your outlook. I mean, on this stuff, I suppose, to cut to the chase of all this, will AUKUS, now that the world has changed so quickly in the past year, will AUKUS survive? Should it survive, and will it survive?
The $368 billion question. Look, it is a really complex question. It's going to be something really difficult for whoever is in power to navigate. I think it's probably first just to make sure that when we discuss AUKUS, that people are fully aware of what AUKUS is, and perhaps most importantly, what AUKUS isn't. It can be conflated with this idea, especially considering Donald Trump and just how erratic and unreliable he is. There's nothing within AUKUS that requires us or compels us to join the USA in any military action. There's nothing in AUKUS that we already have a mutual defence treaty or something close to it with ANZUS. So there's nothing in regards to our sovereignty. What AUKUS is at its simplest form is an agreement to develop and share military technology. Now, there's two pillars on that. The first one is obviously the nuclear submarine aspect. The second pillar is a bit more nuanced and complex, and that talks about working together with the UK and the USA in developing this state-of-the-art, this next frontier of technology. So we're talking about like the AI integration into drone technology, into advanced missile defense technology. And the great irony is the more unreliable the USA is becoming, the more Australia actually kind of needs this stuff, because all of a sudden we don't really know if America's going to come to our aid. And it needs to be remembered that for most of pretty much all of the modern nation of Australia's existence, we've existed with the protection of a hegemony. So we've had Pax Britannia from colonisation up until the fall of Singapore. And then pretty much from that point on, we've had Pax Americana. So most Australians have never grown up with this idea that we'd at any point have to fend for ourselves. So AUKUS, that technology is absolutely something. Military spending across the entire world is going to go up because of America's withdrawal. So we're not alone in that. The first pillar of that, which is obviously the controversial part, and that is these nuclear submarines. Now, I guess there's multiple questions that we need to consider here. The first is, do we even want submarines? Is Australia going to actually benefit from having a fleet of nuclear submarines? My personal view, and that's based on, I guess, some of the experts that I've listened to, is that it is something that would be crucial for Australia to have. We're talking about, again, 20, 30 years down the path. And the hardest thing about any sort of defence planning is you have to imagine what kind of world we're going to be existing in 20, 30 years. You can't deal with in 3 or 4 year gaps. So we have to try and considering just how quickly the unthinkable has become reality in so many different elements across the world, we do have to start planning for contingencies. And, just talking, for instance, about the potential of our trade routes being compromised or even a malevolent actor deciding to blockade Australia. A fleet of nuclear submarines floating around Australia at any one point would be a massive deterrent. And you've got to remember, it's not about us trying to defeat China in a war. It's about having that deterrent. So if anyone was really to try and crush us, we have that deterrent there. So that is the first part. And someone might disagree with me, and I'm sure there'll be some military analyst that might be able to provide a pretty strong case that may not be the case, that technology is moving away from that. But then the second aspect is, are we actually ever going to get them? And then that's probably the big question. And already, I think just in February, the Australian government has already put down $500 million. That's $500 million US as the first down payment for the establishment of, I guess, the capacity within America to start developing these submarines. I think in the last budget was about $3.2 billion set aside to continue to top that up. The issue we have is going forward is are we going to see this? The US are low on their own resources. We have this current government that's in place that is America first. So I really hope that Richard Marles and Anthony Albanese are really having some difficult conversations with their counterparts in America about, first of all, is this going to happen? What kind of contingencies we can, I guess, put in place if we're not going to be getting these submarines? And I think at the same time, we need to remember to try and respond to this question unemotively. And the reason why I say that is because I myself, I've been, shocked and livid with the state of US democracy and where Trump is bringing America. But we need to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because for all America's ills, they are still the absolute, supreme force when it comes to development of military technology and what they're able to offer us. And we've got to remember, even half these submarines are potentially going to be built in Adelaide. And so we have the development of our own, again, domestic defense industry, which helps to ensure our own sovereignty and our own independence. We have the capacity, and we don't want to tear this up and just walk away. And I guess because we're not going to have anywhere else to turn, we can't turn to China and Russia and say, can we have, your missile technology? This is technology we can't develop here. We do need America's help. So it's going to be incredibly delicate. I think there may be a situation where we have to slowly walk back away from our commitments in regards to the submarine, or find another way around it. But we really do want to hold on to that second pillar, because, again, this is stuff where in the current, also this new world that we're going into, we really need it more than ever.
Underwater drones?
Yeah, I think we're obviously seeing in the Ukraine just how quickly military technology is changing. And there's certainly a lot of strategists that are taking that into account. But at the same time, we need to understand the limitations of that. Drones are changing the way a frontline battle is being conducted in Ukraine. But at the same time, that's changed the way war is being conducted within about 5 kilometre radius.
And we have a defence manufacturer that makes drones, I believe, in Victoria, Defentex. They do drone technology that I know that they've had some thing to do with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Which,
absolutely.
That's great.
And I know the domestic defence industry probably has a bad rap for understandable reasons. No one likes an industry that
skirmishes over where we're going to build the submarines, if we're going to build them ourselves. Is it going to be in Western Australia? Is it going to be in South Australia? And, we have now the ADF are recruiting from overseas. We're not recruiting just Australians anymore. I believe it's the Five Eyes countries that we're getting new ADF recruits from, because nobody wants to join up. Why that is, could be any number of things, but regardless.
Why is that actually, Carrick? Why is that?
Well, I think in any situation where you have, in Australia, it's a high wage paying country. So I think my understanding is that they're trying to get to, I think it might be an 80,000 figure by 2040. And I believe that on the current rate, they're about 4,500 or 4,300 short of where they want to be. So, it's something that I know plenty of public service areas are struggling with, trying to compete with the private sector. And I think also, crucially, what we expect from our ADF personnel has changed. It used to be just we needed infantry that could load a weapon. We're looking for engineers. We're looking for people that can use advanced technology. I know in Ukraine at the moment, they're desperately trying to recruit people that can fly drones. So, what we expect from them has changed. In regards to the recruitment of Five Eyes personnel, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, because from an ideological perspective, I don't think that the ADF is defending our flag. I don't think they're fighting for this concept of Australia. They're defending our values, our shared democratic values. And these are values that I believe people from New Zealand, Canada, and the UK share. I would have previously perhaps said the USA, but that now comes with a bit of a caveat or an asterisk. But, we let them serve in our police forces, not in the AFP, but there's plenty of POMs and Kiwis that serve in our state police forces, and we never question their loyalty there.
I kind of agree with you there, Carrick. It's hard to say. It's like if we're outsourcing recruitment for the police and the ADF, we're getting the submarines that are going to be built here. They're going to get built here. They're going to be staffed by Americans. We might have cars coming in from China and the US. Like, we really do just have digging stuff out of the ground as a main industry, don't we? As far as like relying on other countries goes. Obviously, walking back the AUKUS deal at this stage, it'd be basically unheard of as such a big deal. I suspect that maybe it's being kept together just as a geopolitical way to say, like, we're definitely still aligned with the US. Obviously, that's going to be a bit turbulent during, the Trump administration. Afterwards, it'll settle down a bit, no matter what he decides that we should agree with. But the UK Parliament is doing a review into AUKUS at the moment, and they are the UK in AUKUS. Is that right? AUKUS? Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
I do know it, I swear. So we're not even having a look into it at all. Is that sort of just like a show geopolitically to the rest of the world to be like, we're sorted, we're definitely with the US, don't worry about China, even though they're our closest trading partner. If for environmental purposes, they're moving towards renewable energy in as far as the vehicles that they're putting out. And the other person that we have to rely on there is Elon Musk in America. To the average person, it doesn't seem to be as stable. China is sort of keeping very quiet, and there may be problems there that we don't hear about. But it's a hard sell, don't you think? A little bit?
Well, I think I was going to say it depends on who you ask in regards to, or who's speaking for Australia. I think if Peter Dutton's speaking regarding AUKUS, the language he uses is very different. He speaks there very about the commitment to this American alliance and their value system. Labor have been, especially Penny Wong and Richard Marles and Anthony Albanese, significantly more measured in how they represent this. And I think there is an argument for how we can represent AUKUS as not an offensive treaty towards China. As I kind of indicated before, there's a sense of decoupling from America. We're ultimately asking to go out on our own. But we have this access to this technology that we can't develop ourselves. So I can definitely see how it can be represented in different ways. And it's really important how we communicate that to China, how we communicate that to Indonesia and our other neighbors nearby.
Yeah. And the whole submarine thing with America, that's nuclear. The energy thing, so defense and energy here, there's a lot of talk about nuclear, right? It's hard to even I know someone who mentioned to me today that we already had a nuclear power plant in Australia, which we don't. It's a reactor, and I think it's due to be decommissioned. I forget where it is. It starts with Luke.
Lucas Heights, yeah.
Lucas
it's a
Heights,
research facility.
So it's hard to get plain language speaking around what the difference even is in the first place. So no wonder, people depends where you're getting your information from. But
this is the problem with. This is the problem with every issue that matters, right? You can't even start in the current information environment. You can't start with what you need, which is an agreed set of facts. If you want to debate anything, you want to debate nuclear energy, you need an agreed set of facts on nuclear energy. What does that look like? And all you get now is spin saying that it's an instrument of the devil, or spin saying that it's the salvation of humanity, if not only Australia, sort of thing. And what we really need to do is say, hey, what are the facts, and then let's debate the pros and cons. And it's almost impossible to do this currently in Australia and every other Western democracy on issues that matter, because the spin just drowns out the substance.
Threaded in there as well, because anything to do with renewables is immediately linked to greeny, lefty climate stuff, and it's like, well, sure, but can we talk about the actual building blocks of these issues? And it never happens in the mainstream media.
Well,
if you've got an agreed set of facts on anything like electric cars, then you can say, well, what do we need to better integrate electric cars into Australian society? And what we need to do is kind of fix the grid, make it easy for people who can't park off street to charge the cars. They don't have to queue up endlessly during public holidays, and we need to have a charging solution for the thousands of people who might buy EVs who live in high-rise apartment complexes where there's no substantive electricity supply in the basement.
And there you got to get strata involved. You've got strata, council, state and federal.
Yes. But if you point this stuff out, personal experience, what happens is you get called an EV hater. Whereas if I had an EV, or if I wanted an EV and I lived in an apartment block, I'd want people to say, yeah, I want better electricity supply to my apartment block. I want these roadblocks removed. But it's hard to do that when you're being called an EV hater. You know what I mean?
To some extent, I think that the reality is, as social media personalities, we've got to own this. Social media has made it quite difficult to have constructive debates on many of these issues, because it's so easy to oppose anything. It's really hard for any government to come up with any meaningful reform without a real movement against everything. So I think we probably have to own some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, how much do you think? Well, social media and the younger demographics now is contributing, the distrust in institutions and politicians and so on is contributing to the ADF deficit on the recruitment front, Carrick, because, young people are looking at stuff going, how many people
I've
really
got an answer for you if he can't answer it, Michael, but go on.
No, I agree with you. And I think it's probably, as I kind of just mentioned before, how we probably framed our defence force probably needs to change. I think in the past it has been too closely aligned with nationalism and patriotism. So trying to get people to join the front line for this perceived, I guess, national ideal just doesn't resonate with younger people anymore. And I think for a while there, they tried to sell it purely because you got, I guess, some free education and some every second week off or something like that. So perhaps we need to, I guess, appeal to the ideology that does resonate with young people, which in my view should be the defence of democratic ideals.
And it's very difficult when we just had the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Veteran Suicide. I believe they were handed down earlier this year. Haven't heard very much news about it. So if you're, someone of fighting age, young man in Australia, what do you hear about the ADF? Not a very good record with veterans as far as that spin goes. You're probably not picking up all that much about it. And then the Ukraine war, it's hard to figure out what the benefit is really for someone who's thinking about signing up.
Well, war crimes has got to be a huge one because, and you look at the track record, we've marched off to America's wars, Afghanistan. Well, what happened there? The Taliban came back in a couple of decades later, and there they are. So nothing happened there. Iraq, 1 million people died. And it was, oversold. It was sold on a lie. And now we're being told we might have to go to war with China. And, I think there's just got to be distrust in institutions. But the one that interests me right at the moment, Carrick, is we are at war, of course. They don't call it war. They call it a military campaign. But we're involved with the Red Sea thing. I know America's obviously taking the lead and there's been a few human rights abuses going on there. But do we know what Australia's actual involvement is? Because I've checked the defence websites on this stuff and they say absolutely squeak about it. There's nothing you can find about we were leading that task force, the Red Sea task force, and then there was the ceasefire and the Houthis stopped bombing ships in the Red Sea, and now they're ears pinned back again. And, America doesn't appear to be making inroads apart from killing a lot of civilians. So what is our involvement in that? Do you think we should be hearing a bit more about it?
Yeah, in a word, we don't know. Australia's operational security when it comes to military matters is incredibly, I would say superior, but we incredibly lack of transparency, I guess perhaps would be a better way to explain it compared to America. Quite often Australian media find out about what the Australian military is doing through the American military because they have a greater accountability in some instances than Australia does. I happen to have some friends who work in the SAS, and often I find out where they are or broadly where they are, and when we get a bit of an idea about what they might be working on. The situation in Yemen is incredibly complex and difficult from an ethical perspective as well. Obviously, a lot of people would, I guess, support the idea of what they're technically fighting for in regards to in Palestine and Gaza. At the same time, we do have, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's about 23% of global trade goes through the Red Sea. And then we have a situation where an Iranian-backed, funded group are using Iranian missiles to target only Western ships whilst they're letting Russian and Chinese ships pass through the strait. So I definitely think, and I guess this comes down to a lot of trust issues as well, because now, since Trump has taken over, we again have a lack of transparency, significantly more lack of transparency than we had before. We also have that general concern as well that this build-up that's happening in, and I forget the name, I think it's Garcia Island, somewhere in India. We've got about 8 B-2 bombers there at the moment. So there's significant concern that Trump might be attempting to, initiate a conflict with Iran. It's difficult because how much trust do we have in the foreign policy of America? It's changed dramatically. It's become significantly harder to read. And I think Australia, I suspect under Albanese, will perhaps detach itself, hopefully, a bit more than it has in the past, because I don't think it's going to be as popular as it was in the past.
Absolutely. And just on that energy stuff from before and on John's point about the spin, we published a story by Tim Buck. Well, we published a rundown on a report by Tim Buckley, who's a leading renewables energy market analyst, knows his coal, knows his gas, knows his grid. He is very much very much in favour of renewable energy, but he's a very smart guy. So he put out a report saying that the costings of the coalition's nuclear policy, 7 reactors over whatever time frame, would be 4.3 trillion. So the coalition's pegged it at 331 billion, and Labor's saying 600 billion,
wow.
and the bid and the offer on those two, 600 to 331, is large enough, and Dutton's been up at Albanese attacking him over inflating the forecast. And Buckley's come out and said, okay, we're going to go and reverse engineer this report, and we're going to look at the report's assumptions. And the report's assumptions, this is the Frontier Economics report, they assume that the Australian economy will shrink over the next 50 years, and that's why the cost is going to be so low. Now, we pointed this out, and I got absolutely trolled. I'd imagine a lot of them were sort of, party trolls trying to shout it down, but absolutely trolled. And so I published a report after we published the story, did a video on it and so on. But to get to your point about spin, nobody actually goes down and does the basics. And then there's this ad hominem shouting match where people attack each other for being anti-nuclear or pro-nuclear or whatever, or leftist or right-wing nut job or whatever because
everything is tribal, right? It's not an issue. It's not an issue based on facts, because facts are amenable to a conversation, like a reasoned debate. But if you're in my tribe and there's a dude over there who's saying something that our tribe doesn't like, then we better go and stone him. You know what I mean? And that's the conversational equivalent of what goes on social media. Nobody goes, oh yeah, well maybe we could do this, or maybe we could do that, or maybe this is an issue and we need to talk about that, because that's traditionally how we got society better. I mean, that's how the Americans solved the slavery problem. Everyone agreed that there were slaves, and then they had a debate about that, and ultimately one side got up. But these days there wouldn't be that debate.
And you said younger people, the splintering of everyone's in their own tribes and stuff like that. I think that it affects everybody. And I mean,
I think older people are worse.
The stereotype of older Australians not having as good media literacy as people my age, millennials. And then also you've got this younger generation, and there's been some reporting over the fact that, when I use my computer as a millennial, I can, I know how to change and edit a program file, that kind of thing. You use folders and stuff like that. But because younger kids, they just use their phones. They just go click on the icon and that's it. They don't know, what comes inside of an application, that sort of thing. They just know that it's called an app. And to bring it back to basic questioning, though, how many trillion, you'd had that trillion up before, Michael, from that story about the true cost of the nuclear stuff, that one there. Yeah, 4.3 trillion. How many $1 million is that? Just a basic question.
That's, well, a trillion is a billion, is 1,000 billion.
1,000 billion.
4.3 thousand billion.
4.3 thousand billion, and a billion is a thousand million.
So it's $4.3 million.
That's good. That's great.
So it's so that's 4.3 million billion. You're saying?
No, million.
Million. Yeah.
See, no wonder it's hard for people to understand. As soon as I get a figure, I forget it as well. It's too much.
It does seem too much.
I'm
sorry, I'll just add. I just wanted to jump on John's point there, because I actually think he raised a really good point, and it's something that I've noticed a lot, is that lack of a common source of truth. And I know we're going slightly off the topics that we initially discussed, but we do have, everyone now through social media has their own cultivated news feed. So it really is channeled to exactly, and the algorithm gives us what it thinks we need. So if it thinks we need outrage, if it thinks it eventually we become siloed. So it's every chance that what you're seeing on your news feed, Steph and John, are completely different to what I had. And so that's why I think the role of the ABC in Australia is so crucial, in the sense that we need to have broad public trust in the ABC. And from that perspective, it means that if you're on the left, you don't just want the ABC becoming a tool of the left or something that appeals to you. I really think it's important that people should want those contradictory views on the ABC to make sure that as a wide net as possible still see it as a reliable source of truth. So when we do have these discussions, about nuclear, about electric vehicles, about AUKUS, that there's at least someone could turn around and go, well, look, I saw this on the ABC, or I read this on the ABC, so I know it's factual, I know it's accurate. It's so important that we ensure that ABC remains impartial.
Totally agree. Carrick, back in the day when newspapers ruled, you turn over the newspaper, you look at the front page and go, well, somebody has chosen that for you. So they're still running their media agenda, but media was more independent because it was economically efficient in those days with the rivers of gold before the internet came along. But you turn over to page 3 and the main story would be splashed on page 3. There'd be a sidebar on the bottom. And by the time you got to, page 4, occasionally you get to page 4 or page 5 or whatever page you're on, you'd see something that you had no interest in. It might have been nuclear power or cars or some sporting thing or something, but because it was presented to you and came within your, your eyeballs, you learn something new. But you're right. People they have their feed of people that they follow and what sort of news they're interested in. And increasingly it's becoming more sort of, it's concentration spans are diminishing and it's becoming very narrow for people because they're just, you're so right. The siloing of knowledge is epic these days, and it is a huge problem, I think, for people.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in here, guys. I might just because we've only got 10 minutes left before we finish the program. By the way, I'm Josh. I am the editor and producer of the West Report. To do it, we're going to do some closing Patreon remarks. We've actually already spent 50 minutes on the channel so far. So thank you so much, guys, for jumping in. But I just wanted to get everyone's little opinion on how accurate they think this graph is. Now, I'm sure we've all seen it float around the internet quite a fair bit. Oh, Michael, you actually made the graph. I've seen versions where Michael's not on this graph.
You made it.
Did you just add? Did you just add him in the list?
Yeah, I'm really good at Photoshop. So, and
so from left to right, it's got a scale of how biased each media.
I love it. Right in the center, up the top. How good is that? I didn't. Disclaimer, fellas. I did not have any input in making this graph.
No, I did. He paid me to do it. That's why. Yeah.
And you'll notice that they have 2 for the Australian. They've got the Australian on the soft right there, and then it's the Australian opinion on the hard right. They also have 4 corners at the top of the centre, and then the ABC is separate. Oh, well, they've also got 7:30 there. I don't see the ABC News channel in general. Maybe somebody can add it. But that basically checks out for me there.
Yeah, John,
not sure. I'd put the Saturday paper more towards the middle if it was me, but otherwise,
I'd put Sky News right off to the right-hand side, completely off
keep
the
going.
chart. I'd put it on its own. Yeah. I put it on its own chart, just alone. Sky News Australia after dark.
Hey, Sky News during the day does some good 24-hour reporting. It's not the same thing as Sky after dark.
Yeah, but to an extent, I think that misses the point. Like, I've worked in the media since the 90s. Which is basically the age of the dinosaurs, I know, but the main biases in the media are not left and right leaning. They're things like laziness and sensationalism and conflict. They're the main biases in the media that get in the way of the actual distribution of information. Like, I trained as an engineer, and that's like applied science. And then when you move over to the media and you see this stuff and you think, wow, that's not the way information's supposed to work.
I think
because if you bias towards laziness and sensationalism,
rewriting press releases, John.
Yeah,
yes,
I think You've actually had. I actually used to work many moons ago for Australian Associated Press in their media section that would send out the press releases, and it'd be amazing just how many would just copy and paste it word for word. But I actually agree with what John was saying there, which I don't necessarily know how much of this is malevolent and how much it is just that clickbait necessity of getting people to click. So the reality is outrage and anger generates so many more clicks than anything else. So
I could talk about that for hours and hours. Is one of my special interests, but I'm
that's
sure
the
that
bias to
Michael can explain more
sensationalism.
than anybody about. I mean, obviously the funding model for traditional media has collapsed. So where are you getting your money from? And the cautiousness, attacks constantly going at the ABC, if we're talking about the public broadcaster, does make them more cautious to toe the line and not say very much and not advocate for their own journalists and all these kind of things. I think Michael probably has the most experience of that out of everybody, but there's a lot of factors to do with how social media ranks different posts as well. Yeah.
Well, I've got a lot of sympathy for the ABC, but their problem, I think, above all, is self-censorship. Don't forget the ABC it's a government corporation, so it's like a government agency. So their complaints channel, I mean, if somebody rings up and complains to John about his latest video or complains to me, there's only one person to complain to, isn't there, John?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
my give a crap tank is on E on that. Generally, if someone has a bit of a bleat about something, I have a limited capacity to deal with
I
that.
refer them to my greyhound, but
bleating.
Head of HR, Johnny.
The point is, if somebody complains to the ABC, there's this long internecine process of reviews and filling out forms and, there's been a complaint, and then upping it to the next level. And what happens in a news organisation, of course, as you guys know, there is no time in the day. You've got to fill the space. You've got to fill the airwaves or the column inches in a newspaper or the website. And you can't be mucking around spending 3 or 4 hours having meetings. So I used to, when I was an editor at the Herald, I refused to go to meetings because they were always a waste of time. I just said, no, I'm not going to any meetings. It was a sort of house joke. But you can't have, it's very difficult for the ABC. I've got a lot of I've got a lot of sympathy for them because they get kicked by the left and they do get kicked by the right. But in my view, their greatest problem is well, they've got rid of a lot of talent. They've paid people to go, like all these major media. They paid people hundreds of thousands of dollars to leave. So you're getting brain walking out the door all the time as budgets shrink. But they have to self-censor because they go, oh shit, if we run this yarn, we're just going to get so many complaints from Qantas or CBA or, the Israel lobby or whoever it is. And so they just self-censor. And I feel a lot of sympathy for them. And I agree with Carrick's point that they are essential to, we ran a story the other day. The difference between America and Australia is that we've got a relatively well-funded public broadcaster. In America, you've got its
NPR and PBS.
NPR, PBS, but they're just not that well funded. They've got to rely on donations and things.
Well, because they've been dragged down even further than ours have.
Yeah, and Trump has just cut their funding even further.
So I think we've got some Patreon questions you might want to try to get to real quick. Josh?
Trump
So that's a good segue, Steph. So we're towards the end of the program. We're almost over time. So with these live streams, there's something a bit new. We're trying out a new format. So if you join us on Patreon, which is in the description somewhere, our Patreon gets exclusive questions asked by our wonderful panel of guests. So I'm actually going to pull up some questions, and our guests, John and Carrick, you should be able to see the question on the bottom here, but I'll read them out as well. So let me pull this first one up. Our first question here is from, this is going to go to John more likely. Ika is, who is the more cranky old man, John Cadogan or Michael West? I'm really looking forward to it.
Definitely me.
Oh, John, you're such
definitely
a nice
me. No.
Okay,
no.
You guys
round
30 seconds each. Make your point.
Dude, this is the nicest possible version of me. So it's only downhill from here, right? This is as nice as it gets, right?
That's a strong pitch.
I've really tried for this program. This is as nice as I can be. So, Ika, there you go,
Your
mate.
turn. Justify.
Yeah, go on. How are you crankier?
How are you crankier, Mick?
Do you want the title or not?
Well, okay, John's slightly crankier. you know.
I'm giving it to John.
But not tonight. He's been an absolute angel tonight. He's been angelic.
He did our media training before the. I did some media training with him, and HR had a chat to him before the show. So
the hardest thing about this show is I've no profanity. That's so difficult.
You still got a minute, John. You can throw one in there.
I almost wanted to throw one in just as a joke, but I don't know if it's allowed.
We're all behaving.
Rock and roll. Next question, guys. We're going to move on to the next one. I'll give everyone 30 seconds each to kind of sum it up the best you can. So who do we have here? I think we have Jack. Now, this is a long one. Jack Herod from Patreon. It seems to me that the current environment of high cost of living, where people are focusing on necessities or their personal situation, arguments for policy, such as addressing climate change, based on emotion, appeals or moral arguments are falling on deaf ears. With the increasing global demand for green energy or clean resources, hydrogen production or green steel, why isn't the perspective of market forces or the argument for potential creation of industry, manufacturing jobs used more often? Now, we actually kind of already went over this in our chats tonight, but I'm going to throw to Carrick. Can you sum that up in 30 seconds?
In my 30 seconds, yeah, absolutely. I think it's just they're really complex discussions and they're really complex answers. And sometimes that's just not as simple as a slogan to understand. I think we will start to see climate change impacting us financially really soon because insurance prices are going up. And I feel like that's the canary down the mine because the insurance industry is effectively a window into the future. They're asking us to pay for what could potentially happen. And I think hopefully to some degree that will be a catalyst for in changing the way we vote because it will start to impact our bottom dollar. How was that? That's 30 seconds.
Yeah. John, you're up, mate.
The problem that Jack highlights there is immediacy, right? If you can't feed your family, that's an immediate problem and it's quite serious. Climate change doesn't seem that immediate because it's an incremental problem, like it's an existential threat to humanity. It just doesn't seem quite that serious in the moment. So it is really difficult to cut through on issues of this nature if you can't pay the rent or the mortgage or feed the family. So, yeah, I totally sympathise with that, but most of us have the capacity to care about more than one thing at once. So perhaps there is hope for humanity after all.
Wow. Great summary.
Oh, my quick take on, I think corporatocracy is one of my bugbears, and it's part of the problem because you have the debates effectively because of campaign finance, political donations, lobbying and so on, and a weakened media, mainstream media, and this proliferation now of social media and independent media. You've got the debates being controlled, the major debates, like they'll pick something out of the doorstop from the Albo or Dutton press conference, and that will be like the story of the day. And that will be a story which is relevant to the media duopoly and the political duopoly within their boundaries of conversation. We don't want to be talking, in the mainstream political or media duopoly about things which are too serious to talk about. Or, for instance, the fundamentally flawed idea of nuclear power costs. Right, so we're just better off, as John says, we're in a world of spin the whole time, very Trumpian, and that's why he was so avant-garde on the bullshit front, because he realised that there wasn't enough time in the day, flood the zone with distractions and so on. So I think the structure of power in Australia, where you've got a weakened mainstream and a political duopoly which wants to keep the debate within their fairly nice confines on everything.
And
Michael got a swear word in there as well, just importantly.
I didn't hear it.
I had to show that I was cranky with John.
We do desperately want the ABC to continue to be able to exist as a pillar of, a reference, if you will, for what things are like within the realms of being probably quite true, despite the, opinion pieces and panel shows that they have. Not that we're on one now, but you can always get the truth from Michael West Media on our website. If you want to sign up to the Patreon, you can do that as well in the link in the description. And we're just running out of time now.
We might just go one more question before we. One more question for our guests because our Patrons are very important to us, and that. And I'm not sure if Michael mentioned before as well. Yeah, we don't actually have any major corporate sponsors for a lot of this. Michael West Media, as far as I'm aware, is 100% community funded. So this is why we're trying to enforce the Patreon questions as well. So Michael can fact check me on that one. But as far as I'm aware, we are 100% community funded.
By the viewers.
Apart from YouTube ads. So partly funded by Clive Palmer.
Comment below what ads you've gotten tonight on the stream, guys. Our viewers.
We've got one more, Josh.
We've got one more, and I'm trying to pick which one because there's a couple of really good ones.
Didn't you have enough time,
look,
Josh?
No, we do. We can stretch it out a tiny bit.
Just pick one.
I'll put them in a Q&A anyway for later on.
Yeah. Look, so this is obviously a dicey one. We're going to keep it under 30 seconds, but who ultimately was responsible for that fake caravan bomb plot? And if you have any insights to that, I might chuck to Carrick because obviously your history with the AFP.
Yeah, go on, Carrick.
Yeah,
here you go, mate.
No, I don't know. I understand there's some organised crime links. Unfortunately, I don't have any inside mail. Sorry to end on such a disappointing anticlimax. It was my old team that went out there, but whilst I do still talk to them, they don't tell me any top secret information anymore. So I haven't
under
asked.
wraps.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have the scoop for you.
Michael, anything to add?
I'll have a punt. If I was Sportsbet and I was running a book on it, the fact that nothing's been found yet, but we found 10 or 15 culprits that have been involved in the actual incidents on the ground, and there's a mastermind running around somewhere, and the mastermind story about wanting to gain advantage in a discussion about how long his prison sentence was going to be or whatever, that doesn't really stack up for me. So if I was running a book on it, I would probably have, and this isn't an accusation, but I would probably have Mossad or related entities at very short odds.
Which the AFP did come out and talk about. There is a Mossad agents acting in Australia as well. I think that was a proven fact, not for this story, but yeah, I think
there's spies from everywhere. We had that Russian guy.
Take on the caravan.
Yeah, John, last question, mate. Dicey one for the end. We've got to answer our patrons.
Okay, look, the best answer to this question harks back to what we were talking about earlier about having your own curated feed that basically allows you to fracture the epistemology of reality. So who was responsible for the caravan bomb? Whoever you want, dude.
Wow. Yeah, pretty much.
The lizard people. Yeah, cool.
That's who I think it was.
Queen Elizabeth II, whatever.
She's not really dead.
Oh, rock and roll, guys. Thank you so much.
Those are all jokes. Sorry.
Don't take us too seriously, even though we're a serious media organisation. Look, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. My name is Josh. I'm the producer for Michael West. Thank you so much to John, Carrick, Michael for joining us in tonight. And thank you for Steph,
me, the host,
for hosting.
Steph, obviously, yes.
It's definitely not me who's hosting right this second. But John and Carrick, I'll start with Carrick. Where can we find you? Are you on social media? Where do we find out more about you if we want to go hurl abuse after this this live stream? Yeah.
Send your abuse to my Facebook page. As you know, Josh, I don't read my inbox messages anymore. But Carrick Ryan on Facebook and Instagram if you want to see what I write and hear my opinions.
Cool. John, what about yourself?
For me, just go to youtube.com and type in the words AutoExpert, and I will inflict myself upon you endlessly.
And Michael, what's your Twitter handle again?
At Michael West Biz or across. We're over all channels, aren't we, Josh? But guys, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been great to see you both, and good to have a yarn.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Yeah,
thanks,
let's sign off. We'll see you guys. Thank you so much for our
guys
viewers as
next
well.
Thanks,
I think we had about
Joshy.
450 people at one stage, so record numbers every week. I'm really happy with that. We're going to end the stream, and we'll see you guys later. Catch ya.
Yeah.